Do you ever realize that some games got so good mechanics that are absolutely satisfying, which makes them way ahead of their time? There are many games that got a lot of effort on them and become a truly masterpiece in gaming industry. So without wasting our time, let's get into the list of this video games. The Elder Scrolls V: Skyrim is a 2011 action role-playing game developed by Bethesda Game Studios and published by Bethesda Softworks. It is the fifth main installment in the Elder Scrolls series following The Elder Scrolls IV: Oblivion 2006 and was released worldwide for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360 on November 11, 2011. Skyrim was developed using the Creation Engine, which was rebuilt specifically for the game. The team opted for a unique and more diverse open world than Oblivion's Imperial province of Cyrodiil, which game director and executive producer Todd Howard considered less interesting by comparison. The game is set 200 years after the events of Oblivion and takes place in Skyrim, the northernmost province of Tamriel, a continent on the planet Nirn. Its main story focuses on the player character, the Dragonborn, on their quest to defeat Alduin the World Eater, a dragon prophesied to destroy the world. Throughout the game, the player completes quests and develops the character by improving skills. The game continues the open-world tradition of its predecessors by allowing the player to travel to discovered locations in the game world at any time and to ignore or postpone the main storyline indefinitely. Middle-earth: Shadow of War is a 2017 action-adventure game developed by Monolith Productions and published by Warner Bros. Interactive Entertainment. Shadow of War is the sequel to 2014's Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, both of which are based on J.R.R. Tolkien's Legendarium. The game is set in between the events of Peter Jackson's The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings film trilogies, from which the game also takes inspiration. The player continues the story of Talion, the Gondorian ranger who bonded with the wraith of the elf lord Celebrimbor as they forge a new ring of power to amass an army to fight against Sauron. The game builds upon the Nemesis system introduced in Shadow of Mordor, allowing Talion to gain followers from several races of Middle-earth and command them in warfare. Shadow of War expanded on the scope of Shadow of Mordor by introducing new game mechanics and extending the Nemesis system, which procedurally generates orc characters for players to fight and recruit. Compared to its predecessor, the game features more lighthearted moments, and the 5 regions were designed to be bigger and more colorful. Locations in the game were inspired by the landscapes of eastern Washington, Alaska, and Iceland. Troy Baker returned to provide the voice of Talion while simultaneously serving as the game's motion capture director. Other cast members include Alastair Duncan as Celebrimbor, Laura Bailey, and Pollyanna McIntosh. Assassin's Creed Unity is a 2014 action-adventure game developed by Ubisoft Montreal and published by Ubisoft. It was released in November 2014 for PlayStation 4, Windows, and Xbox One, and in December 2020 for Stadia. It is the 8th major installment in the Assassin's Creed series, and a successor to 2013's Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag. It also has ties to Assassin's Creed Rogue, which was released for the previous generation consoles on the same day as Unity. The plot is set in a fictional history of real-world events and follows the millennia-old struggle between the assassins who fight to preserve peace and free will and the Templars who desire peace through control. The framing story is set in the 21st century and features an unidentified and unseen protagonist who joins the assassins as an initiate to help them locate the corpse of an 18th-century Templar Grand Master. The main story is set in Paris during the French Revolution from 1789 to 1794 and follows assassin Arnaud Dorian and his efforts to expose the true powers behind the revolution, while seeking revenge against those responsible for his adoptive father's murder. Unity retains the series' third-person open-world exploration as well as introducing revamped combat, parkour, and stealth systems. The game also introduces cooperative multiplayer to the Assassin's Creed series, letting up to 4 players engage in narrative-driven missions and explore the open-world map. Crysis is a first-person shooter video game developed by Crytek and published by Electronic Arts for Microsoft Windows and released in November 2007. It is the first game in the Crysis series. A standalone expansion entitled Crysis Warhead was released in 2008, following similar events as Crysis but from a different narrative perspective. 4 at the time Crysis was released. And years thereafter, it has been praised for its milestones in graphical design commensurate with high hardware requirements. The game is based in a future where a massive, ancient alien-built structure has been discovered buried inside a mountain in the fictional Lingshan Islands, near the coast of the East Philippines. 5. The single-player campaign has the player assume the role of U.S. Army Delta Force soldier Jake Dunn, referred to a game by his call sign, Nomad. Nomad is armed with various futuristic weapons and equipment, most notably a nano-suit which was inspired by the real-life military concept of Future Force Warrior. 6. In Crisis. The player fights both North Korean and extraterrestrial enemies in various environments on and around the island. A remastered version of the game titled Crisis Remastered was released for Microsoft Windows, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch in 2020 and also bundled as part of the Crisis Remastered Trilogy compilation. Metal Gear Solid 5. The Phantom Pain B is a 2015 action-adventure stealth video game developed and published by Konami. Directed, written, and designed by Hideo Kojima as his final work at Konami. It is the 9th installment in the Metal Gear franchise, following Metal Gear Solid 5. Ground Zeroes, a standalone prologue released the previous year. Set in 1984, 9 years after the events of Ground Zeroes, the story follows mercenary leader Punished Venom Snake as he ventures into Soviet-occupied Afghanistan and the Angola-Zaire border region to exact revenge on those who destroyed his forces and came close to killing him during the climax of Ground Zeroes. The game is played from a third-person perspective in an open world which can be explored either on foot or by modes of transport. Snake can use a wide repertoire of weapons and items and receive assistance from several AI companions, allowing the player to combat enemies either stealthily or directly. Enemy soldiers and resources found in the world can be transported to Snake's headquarters, allowing for its expansion and the development of further technology. The game includes 2 separate multiplayer modes, Metal Gear Online, also known as Metal Gear Online 3, and Forward Operating Bases, FOBs. The latter mode allows players to develop FOBs, which can then be invaded by other players. Rise, Son of Rome is a 2013 action-adventure game developed by Crytek and published by Microsoft Studios. Set in an alternate version of ancient Rome, Rise follows the life of the Roman centurion Marius Titus, as he becomes one of the leaders in the Roman legion. Gameplay revolves around Marius using his sword to strike enemies and shield to deflect attacks. Execution sequences are featured in the game, which are quick-time events that serve as an extension to combat. The game features a cooperative multiplayer mode, which tasks players to fight against waves of enemies in maps that are changing dynamically. The game's development began in 2006. Originally, it was set to be a first-person Kinect-only title for the Xbox 360. However, the developer gradually redesigned the game to become a third-person hack-and-slash game, with Kinect serving a diminished role. The development of the game was originally handled by Crytek Budapest, but was later transferred to Crytek's headquarters in Frankfurt, Germany. The game's combat emphasizes on flow, a term referring to a player's ability to move on to fight against another enemy upon defeating an enemy with few limitations in between. The team partnered with the Imaginarium Studios to develop the cinematic and motion capture technology for the game. Competitive multiplayer modes developed by Ruffian Games were cancelled. Sleeping Dogs is a 2012 action-adventure game developed by United Front Games and published by Square Enix. The game was released for PlayStation 3, Windows, and Xbox 360 in August 2012. Set in contemporary Hong Kong, the story follows martial artist and undercover police officer Wei Shen, who infiltrates the Sun On Yi Triad organization. Gameplay focuses on Wei Shen's martial arts moves, fighting, shooting, and parkour abilities, and on gadgets that can be used for combat and exploration. Players must complete missions to unlock content and continue the story, but they may instead freely roam the game's open-world environment and engage in both legal and criminal activities. The latter may incite a police response, the intensity of which is controlled by a heat system. Actions such as fighting, driving, and racing grant Shen statistical rewards and earn the player achievements. Sleeping Dogs development began in 2008. The game was announced in 2009 as part of the True Crime series but was cancelled by Activision Blizzard in 2011 as a result of the project's delays and budget issues. 6 months later, Square Enix purchased the publishing rights and renamed the game Sleeping Dogs without the True Crime license but considered a spiritual successor. During development, United Front staff visited Hong Kong to conduct field research for the visual environments and sound. Square Enix London Studios worked with United Front for the development. The Witcher 3: Wild Hunt is a 2015 action role-playing game developed and published by the Polish studio CD Projekt. It is the sequel to the 2011 game The Witcher 2: Assassins of Kings and the third game in the Witcher video game series, played in an open world with a third-person perspective. The games follow the Witcher series of fantasy novels written by Andrzej Sapkowski. The game takes place in a fictional fantasy world based on Slavic folklore. Players control Geralt of Rivia, a monster slayer for hire known as a Witcher, and search for his adopted daughter, who is on the run from the otherworldly Wild Hunt. Players battle the game's many dangers with weapons and magic, interact with non-player characters, and complete quests to acquire experience points and gold, which are used to increase Geralt's abilities and purchase equipment. The game's story has 3 possible endings, determined by the player's choices at key points in the narrative. Development began in 2011 and lasted for 3.5 years. Central and Northern European cultures formed the basis of the game's world. The game was developed using the Unreal Engine 3, which enabled CD Projekt to create a complex story without compromising its open world. The music was primarily composed by Marcin Przybylowicz and performed by the Brandenburg State Orchestra. The Last of Us Part 1 is a 2022 action-adventure game developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony Interactive Entertainment. A remake of the 2013 game The Last of Us, it features revised gameplay including enhanced combat and exploration and expanded accessibility options. Players control Joel, who is tasked with escorting the young Ellie across a post-apocalyptic United States and defend her against cannibalistic creatures infected by a mutated strain of the cordyceps fungus. The game includes a remake of the 2014 expansion pack The Last of Us, Left Behind, which follows Ellie and her best friend Riley. Development was led by game director Matthew Gallant and creative director Sean Escague, who replaced original directors Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann. Part 1 was rebuilt for the updated hardware, requiring new animations, art direction, and character models to align with the original development team's vision. The cutscenes and narrative beats were analyzed to identify crucial storylines and their original direction and purpose. The team built upon the game engine of The Last of Us Part 2, 2020, by expanding the gameplay, technology, and accessibility features. Part 1 features audio descriptions, supports 3D audio, and uses the DualSense controller's haptic feedback and adaptive triggers. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a 2018 action-adventure game developed and published by Rockstar Games. The game is the third entry in the Red Dead series and a prequel to the 2010 game Red Dead Redemption. The story is set in a fictionalized representation of the United States in 1899 and follows the exploits of Arthur Morgan, an outlaw and member of the Van der Linde gang, who must deal with the decline of the Wild West while attempting to survive against government forces, rival gangs, and other adversaries. The game is presented through first- and third-person perspectives, and the player may freely roam its interactive open world. Gameplay elements include shootouts, robberies, hunting, horseback riding, interacting with non-player characters, and maintaining the character's honor rating through moral choices and deeds. A bounty system governs the response of law enforcement and bounty hunters to crimes committed by the player. The game's development lasted over 8 years, beginning soon after Red Dead Redemption's release, and it became one of the most expensive video games ever made. Rockstar co-opted all of its studios into one large team to facilitate development. They drew influence from real locations as opposed to film or art, focused on creating an accurate reflection of the time with the game's characters and world. The game was Rockstar's first built specifically for 8th-generation consoles, having tested their technical capabilities while porting Grand Theft Auto 5. The game's soundtrack features an original score composed by Woody Jackson and several vocal tracks produced by Daniel Lanois. Development included a crunch schedule of 100-hour weeks, leading to reports of mandatory and unpaid overtime. Red Dead Online, the game's online multiplayer mode, lets up to 32 players engage in a variety of cooperative and competitive game modes.